Hello there, my fellow myth and fantasy nerds. My name is Tanner, and I'd like to welcome you back to my YouTube channel. Now, for today's video, I will be retelling yet another story by the maestro of the macabre, Edgar Allen Poe. However, this story is unique compared to my other spooky season content so far. You see, the main difference is that both The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and The Mask of the Red Death are written from a third-person perspective through the eyes of an omniscient narrator that is otherwise not part of the story. But this story is actually written from a first-person perspective, where the story is told from the point of view of the main character, if that makes sense. Because of this, my retelling of the story will be keeping the spirit of the original writing by me acting as not just the storyteller, but also as the main character. Now, be forewarned, as with the last two videos I've done so far, links to both in the cards and the description down below, there will be certain parts of the story that get rather violent and graphic, so viewer and listener discretion is very much advised. Now that we've got that out of the way, as always, make sure you leave a like on this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe down below. Pretty please! It'll help me make new content for you. And without further ado, I bring you The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. Lights? I'm not crazy, I tell you. Nervous? Anxious? Sure. But why do you say that I'm crazy? If anything, my illness has enhanced my awareness, not made it worse. My hearing is my most enhanced sense. It's allowed me to hear everything. Here on earth, up in heaven, I've even heard many horrible things down in the inferno itself. How could I be crazy then? Listen well, and you'll see just how calm and earnest I am in telling my story. My entire story. Now, I don't entirely remember when I first had the thought, but when it came to my brain, the obsession kept me awake all night and all day. I had no motive, and it wasn't out of frenzy. I loved the guy like a brother. He never did anything to offend me or hurt me in any way. I also didn't want his money, although he did have a lot. But his eye. Yeah, his one eye. It was blue, cloudy, almost like a vulture's eye. Whenever he would stare at me with it, it would send shivers down my spine. So, slowly, over time, I decided I would get rid of the man and his eye for good. Now, you probably still see me as crazy. But what does a crazy person know? A crazy person would have done it as soon as the thought came to them, but I didn't. I was cautious instead. Discreet, cunning. Oh yeah, he never even knew. The whole week leading up to that fateful night, I treated him just as well as I had before, maybe even better. Every night, around midnight, I would open his bedroom door just a little, just enough to poke my head through. Then I'd stick a lantern in, but the lantern would be completely covered, so no light would wake the man up. You should have seen me. You would have chuckled just at how subtle I was. How slow, so I wouldn't wake the man up. It would take me what felt like an hour just to stick my head in enough to see if he was still sleeping in bed. Now tell me, would a crazy person be so calculated? Anyway, once my head was entirely in the room, I would open the lantern, slowly, carefully. The rusty hinges would squeak if I wasn't careful. I would only open it to let a single beam of light lay across the man and his vulture-like eye. 7 nights I did this, every night at midnight. But his eyes were always closed, so of course I couldn't do it. You see, it wasn't the man himself that disturbed me, only his vulture-like eye. Anyway, every morning I would eagerly walk into his room, calling his name enthusiastically, and asking him how his night was. He would have to be a very discerning gentleman if he ever suspected that every night at midnight I watched him sleep. On the 8th night, I was much more vigilant than the other nights. I slowly opened the door. The minute hand of a clock moved quicker than my hand that night. Now, before then, I never fully perceived the scope of my abilities, just how clearly I could think. I was so proud of myself, it was all I could do to resist congratulating myself. There I was, slowly opening the bedroom door, and the old man none the wiser. That thought almost made me giggle, or maybe I actually did and he heard me. Either way, he suddenly moved in bed, as if something startled him. Now, you may think that when he did, I retreated immediately, but I didn't. As with every night, his room was black as ink. He was deathly afraid of robbers, so he kept his window shut and locked and the curtains drawn. I knew he couldn't see the door opening, so I slowly pushed it open more and more. I had my head all the way in, and I was just getting ready to open the lantern, like I did 7 times before, but in my nervousness, my hand fumbled with the tin clasp. The old man shot up in bed and called out, "Who goes there?" I froze on the spot, and my mouth felt glued shut. I stood there, not daring to so much as wiggle a finger for a whole hour. I never heard him lie back down in bed, so I knew that he was alert, sitting up, wide awake, with his ears pricked. Exactly like mine were for the past few nights, keeping vigilant. Soon, I heard the old man let out a groan, and I knew this wasn't a groan of pain or of misery, but one of pure fear. The unmistakable sound that occurs when every fiber of your being is filled to the brim with pure horror. I knew that sound because I made it many times before. Usually at around midnight when everyone else was in dreamland, I found that sound surging from the very core of my being. Yes, I know how the old man felt, and I felt sorry for him, though inside my heart chuckled. I think he was wide awake at the first small noise, ever since he moved in bed, and the terror was only waxing and building within him, and I think he must have been trying to convince himself that these fears were irrational, telling himself, "Oh, it was just a cricket," or "Oh, it was just a mouse scampering on the floor," or "It's just the wind whistling in the chimney." But I don't think it worked. In fact, I think he knew that the Grim Reaper was waiting for him, and this presence is how he could so much as perceive my head in the room, though he couldn't see me or hear me. I waited for a long time, but I didn't hear him fall back asleep. After a while, I decided to open the lantern, just a little. Very sneakily, I opened the lantern, until a thin beam of light appeared, about as thin as a thread from a spider's web. The beam illuminated the vulture-like eye. It was wide open, the dull blue veil that froze the blood in my veins. It was unmistakable, but my aim with the lamp was so precise I couldn't see the rest of the old man's face or body, just that eye. As I stared at the eye, my fear slowly turned to fury, which became worse when my heightened ears picked up a fast-paced sound. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. It was muffled, quiet, fast-paced, like the sound a watch makes when it's muffled by a pocket. I knew the sound as well as any other. It was the beating of a heart, and in fact, it was the old man's heart beating in his chest, like a soldier, spurred into battle by the beating of a drum. The beating of the heart only served to aggravate me further. Even so, I stayed where I was, barely breathing, holding the lantern as still as if my arm was a tree branch. I tried my hardest to keep that small ray of light on the old man's eye, while the beating of his heart quickened. Faster and faster, louder and louder. The old man must have been feeling some severe levels of horror. The heartbeat was growing to the point where it could have awakened the dead. Just thinking about it is making my anxiety worse. Oh, but let me tell you, what I'm feeling right now pales in comparison to what I was feeling that night. Even so, I was determined not to move. The old man's heartbeat grew louder and louder. I thought for sure his heart was becoming a ticking time bomb. A little while later, I had a terrible thought. The heartbeat was so loud, I became afraid it would for sure wake up the entire neighborhood. I knew I couldn't let that happen. So with a yell from me and a single shriek from the old man, the deed was done. I let him fall to the floor, and once he did, I pushed him under the bed. When I was finished, I smiled with relief. However, though muffled, the old man's heart was still beating wildly, though now I knew it couldn't be heard through the walls. Soon, the heartbeat got slower and slower until it stopped completely. It was then I knew the old man was dead. I pulled him out from under the bed and looked at him. He wasn't moving, and he was staring with eyes like marbles. I placed my hand on his chest and didn't move. There was no pulse to be felt. I grinned. The man was as dead as a doornail, and his vulture-like eye would never bother me anymore. You still think I'm crazy. I can tell. But trust me, the thoughtful and prudent way I hid the body could never be something a crazy person would do. I knew the night was drawing to a close, so I had to work quickly, but quietly. The first thing I did was disassemble the body. I removed his head, his arms, his legs, and then I pulled away 3 of the floorboards and hid the pieces underneath, replacing the floorboards in such an innocuous way no one would be able to find them unless they knew where to look. I even had a pail on the floor so that there wasn't so much as a single speck of blood to clean up. It was just turning 4 in the morning when I finished cleaning up, and it was still dark as if it was midnight. Just as the clock struck 4, I heard a knocking on the front door. I was so light on my feet I practically floated down the stairs to open the door. There on the stoop were 3 police officers, who introduced themselves with the finest of courtesy. They told me a neighbor called because they had heard a shriek earlier in the night, and they were thinking some criminal actions were going on. I smiled and let them in, because of course I didn't think I had anything to worry about. I did tell them a little fib, saying that I was the one who shrieked because of a particularly bad nightmare, and that the old man was away on a business trip and wouldn't be back for a while. I gave them the grand tour of the house and told them I had nothing to hide and they were welcome to search. After a while, I took them to his bedroom. I showed them, in fact, all his worldly possessions were intact and accounted for. I even brought chairs into the room and told them to sit down and rest for a moment. Here's where I may have gotten a little too cocky, because I took my own chair and put it right over the spot where I buried the old man. The police were convinced by my cheery demeanor that there was indeed nothing wrong. They sat and talked, and I answered every single question they threw at me. Soon enough, however, I was starting to grow nervous and secretly wanted them to leave. I had developed a headache and my ears were ringing, but they still chatted away as if nothing was amiss. The ringing grew louder in my ears, and it slowly became more noticeable. I tried talking over the ringing to distract myself, but then, with slowly dawning horror, I discovered that the ringing was not, in fact, a malfunction of my ears. Why was this dread gripping my soul and causing my blood to run cold? It was because the ringing sounded muffled, quick yet quiet, like the sound a watch makes when muffled by a pocket. I started talking more and more, trying to drown out the ringing in my ears. But if the officers could hear it, they didn't act like they could. My talking grew more intense, but the noise grew louder. I discussed things that most would deem completely insignificant, and my voice grew louder and louder, and my body language more intense. Oh, why wouldn't these officers leave? I walked up and down, practically stomping. Oh, merciful heavens, what was I going to do? I ranted profanely, practically rabid at that point. I scraped my chair violently across the floorboards, but the noise just became louder than ever. If the officers could hear the noise, they were very good at acting like they couldn't, talking pleasantly like they were. They couldn't hear it, could they? No, it wasn't possible. They definitely knew about the noise. They could hear it. They definitely were suspicious. Why, I thought, and I still think of it to this day, they can hear it, and yet they ignore it, making it seem like I was a joke, a laughingstock. I couldn't take their ridicule anymore, their smiles, their hypocrisy. I couldn't take the heartbeat either. I had to say something, anything, or else I'd just die. Scoundrels, I howled. Brutes! Creeps! Fine, I confess, I surrender. Look under the floorboards. Can't you hear the old man's still beating heart? Well, how's that for an ending? Anyway, and there we have it. That was The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. If you liked this video and you want more, please consider leaving a like and subscribing down below so you don't miss any new content. Also, if you have any other ideas you want to see in future videos, please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Who knows? It might just happen. Alright, well, that's all the time I have for this video, so I'll see you all next week with a very special Halloween video. See you guys then.